Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Today's guest is Phil Andrews, CEO of USA Weightlifting. Phil has established himself as one of the leading sports administrators in the US. He has transformed weightlifting's governance and reputation, attracting record participation levels and sponsorships. We talk about his work as USA Weightlifting, his brief time at the International Weightlifting Federation, their hybrid competitions, and much more. Phil Andrews, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate you having me on.
You are the CEO of the USA Weightlifting Association. Could you tell us what this role includes?
A little bit of everything and a little bit of crazy, a little bit of the whole business, really. It's sometimes high performance, sometimes the business, sometimes membership services, sometimes marketing, sometimes sponsorship, and then, of course, compliance and things like athlete welfare and safe sport, which is our movement here in the United States against sexual abuse and generally abuse in sport, doping, international relations. There's a vast, wide-ranging array of things that come into the day-to-day. I cannot complain about having a job that's boring, this is for sure.
You have done so many things, and we will talk about them here in the interview. But just to start, when did you start with the USA Weightlifting?
So I've just entered my 9th year with USA Weightlifting. I wasn't the CEO that whole time. I spent some time as our director of events and programs and was promoted, first of all, to interim CEO in very late 2015 after we hosted the World Championships, and then to permanent CEO in April of the following year.
I see. If we talk about the last year, a different year,
Yep.
You still managed to do great things with the USA Weightlifting.
We tried.
Yeah, so one of them is that you managed to attract more sponsors in that year compared to the year before. Can you explain a little bit how you did that?
We did, and I think perhaps having some space without so many of our events running maybe added some capacity for us to spend some time on concentrating on our sponsorship business, and that proved to do rather well, especially towards the end of last year. I think in the middle of the year, a lot of people had some fear about sponsoring sport, partly because events weren't happening, partly because of their own budgetary issues of the effects of COVID-19 on their business. But we signed some really great sponsors towards the end of last year, a few of which are still to be announced, but the contract is signed. One that I would perhaps highlight is Gooder Sunglasses, which is a brand that's just coming into the fitness world, but has been around in things like surfing and skiing and snowboarding for a long time, which, interestingly enough, by complete coincidence, I've worn for a while myself. So it's when that possibility came up, I was rather intrigued and said, "Oh, okay. Well, organically, I actually buy them myself. They're only about $30 to get a pair of those, and they're really quite nice." So, what I like about them being a partner with us is they're not from the fitness world or from the weightlifting world. It's really they're using weightlifting to enter the fitness world, which I really like that they've chosen us to enter that market. So yeah, we concentrated a little bit of time on that. I think one of the things I want to highlight is our staff culture really helped. A lot of people were really challenged by COVID, and that includes us. But my staff and team, as well as our community, really took the attitude of, we're going to hit this hard. We're going to find a way to survive, and actually, in the end, find a way to do really quite well during the pandemic. We actually launched our first online competition in mid-March of last year. It was the same week the NBA and Vegas closed. And that was the moment for me. I didn't even know Vegas casinos had doors that closed. So it's when Vegas closed down. So at that point, we were able to launch our first online competition. We had online coaching courses less than 2 weeks after that. And that's a lot down to the culture of our staff here at USA Weightlifting, their skill and their hard work. And definitely isn't just me. That is a lot down to that.
It's a team effort.
Very much so.
And something else that you managed to do was that you made quite a significant profit also in 2020. Was that a lot due to the sponsors, or what other factors contributed?
So one thing to understand, obviously, Marcus, your listeners are wider than the United States.
Yeah.
In the US, quite unusually, we don't have government funding. So very few countries in the world have zero government funding from a Ministry of Sport or Ministry of Health. We're in that position. We also have very, very small funding from the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And the reason for that is because historically, and we believe 21 will be different, the weightlifting for the US has not done terribly well in the Olympic Games. So 98% of our budget is self-funded. So we make money by coaching courses, by membership sales, by events, by sponsorship, etc., and by fundraising. So a lot of those did rather well. Fundraising was really interesting. We did better than we expected in fundraising in 2021. You'd expect in a pandemic that would go down. But what happened is those people who could give gave a little bit more and were enthused to give. We have raised money for our clubs as well as part of that. We raised 71,000 to support our clubs. So that was really interesting. The biggest impact was our online coaching courses because we were doing those in-house, which meant our costs were lower and we were able to put more people into one course and be able to bring people in where they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. Because previously, let's take the state of Alaska, which is enormous. It's our biggest state in the nation. If you lived in northern Alaska, there's no way you could get to a USA Weightlifting coaching course without a very significant trip, a couple of overnight stays. Now you can do that in the comfort of your own home. So even post-pandemic, there's a place for those online courses. That was a massive impact for us. Sponsors sticking with us and signing new sponsors was big. Fundraising, whilst we definitely lost some donors, was huge. Membership, we retained well, better than most national governing bodies. We did lose membership in 2020, but not significantly so. And then our events are not necessarily a massive profit center for us. So a lot of NGBs in the US, national governing bodies, national federations in the US, rely on those events for their funding. We don't, and we were fortunate in this particular case that that's not our business model. So we actually saved money in some cases by not having the event. And we also saved money by doing a very thorough cost review of a lot of our contracts that we have and pressing the reset button, a lot of that. And the other thing that we did that did help with that, I want to be clear about this, is of course we didn't compete internationally. So we saved a lot of cost in doing that. Am I proud that we were able to deliver our record surplus in our budget? Yes, because in a pandemic, I still think that's rather good. Most national governing bodies, I believe, will be posting likely a loss in 2020. I know a couple will not, and this is talking specifically about the United States here. So is it a big achievement? Yes. Am I extremely proud of my staff? Yes. It's one of the things that I'm very proud of, that we retained all of our staff, and more importantly, we retained all of our athlete funding. Yes. All those things are great, but I'm also conscious that part of that reason was because we didn't have some of our costs we normally would. And 21, we have some competitions that are going to go ahead that are 2020. So we have 2 Pan American Championships to attend and fun, for example. So there's going to be a lot of costs that we see in 21 that might have originally been seen in 20. It's a good success, yes, but cautious about 2021.
If there is something that this pandemic has showed us is that we need to be able to be flexible and to adapt to the situation. And I mean, what you described there is just exactly that, how you had the online coaching classes, etc. So that's very well done.
Thank you.
And to your last point, that you have events coming up in 2021 that were probably canceled from 2020.
Correct.
Can you be a little bit more specific of what was supposed to happen in 2020 and what are we looking forward to in 2021?
I mean, obviously, the first one is the Olympic Games. This is the obvious one. We're hoping for some really great success there, hoping for our best Olympic Games in 60 years for USA Weightlifting. We're hoping for somewhere between 3 and 6 medals in that Olympics, which is a vast improvement from 2016. We won 1 medal. And before that, no medals since 2000, where we won a gold and a bronze, and first time women were allowed into the game. And now this is a time when we had only a few hundred women in USA Weightlifting. Now just over half of our athlete members are women. And our women's team arguably is one of the top teams in the world. So that's the number one, and of course the highlight of the year. This year also we have the planned 2021 Junior Pan American Games. It's the first time they're hosting the young person's version of the Pan American Games. But the qualifier was supposed to be in, I believe, September of this previous year. So this is one example of an event that got moved into 2021. Similarly, the Pan American Championships, the senior, was one of the last Olympic qualifiers. And without boring you with the very in-depth way you qualify for the Olympics in weightlifting, it's a very important final qualification event for many of our athletes. That event also was rearranged by 1 year to be in 2021. So we will attend the 2020 Pan American Championships in 2021. But of course, there's also a 2021 version of that event. So we have a number of these examples, particularly here regionally in the Western Hemisphere, in the Pan American region, where we're going to a double event. Another good example, although it may not turn out to be within the Olympic qualifying period, is two of our athletes would have had the Junior World Championships as a qualifier. That's now in May in Saudi Arabia, currently outside of the window, and the IOC and the IWF will both have to approve it being used again. If that is approved, they could potentially be another two athletes we have to send to Saudi Arabia, all the way from the United States, to those qualification events. Doesn't sound huge, but that's another, a flight to Saudi Arabia from the United States retails around $4,000, plus housing, plus sending their personal coach, which we do for that level of athlete, plus medical. So it's several $1,000s of expense, adds up really quite quickly.
So what is your strategy for 2021 in regards to costs? Because you said in 2020 you were lucky because some cost didn't happen due to canceled event and so on. And now when there will be so many events in 2021, how will you be able to hold the costs down and still be profitable?
We've budgeted rather carefully. I think one of the things that 2020 taught us is to be flexible. We understand now how to operate in a semi-shutdown, if you like, world. We understand how to continue to bring in coaching course revenue and membership revenue, how to operate competitions. In March, we'll have the first ever hybrid competition. Means if you're not comfortable, you can compete from home. Or if you are comfortable, you can come to compete in person.
Okay.
We have some regulations with that around COVID testing and what have you. We budgeted making a broad assumption that the year would ramp up in terms of activity post-COVID. Whether that seems realistic, it did when we set the budget in November, but whether it becomes realistic or realism, we don't know. We certainly may need to review that as we continue along the year. I think careful management, but optimistic management of the organization is what we need across this year. We have some international relations challenges with the IWF elections coming up as well, and making sure we survive as an Olympic sport is another project that's extremely important to us. So there's a lot of competing priorities, some of which we just have to pay that cost. So sending a team to the Pan American Championships to qualify for the Olympic Games, that's a cost we have to pay. That's mission-based. That's why we exist. We have to do it. Olympic Games is the same way. Junior Pan American Games, same way. So there's some things we just have to do that. Similarly, are working towards success in the IWF elections and working to help the IWF reform itself. That's costs that are necessary for our long-term survival. But we need to be careful elsewhere and be thoughtful about what we're doing. And each investment decision needs to be made with care.
The hybrid competition is very interesting and an innovative idea. It's I don't think I've heard it for any other sport.
We think it's the first in the world. We think.
I would think so, but it brings up a lot of questions how that will be implemented. I mean, with regards to weigh-ins and drug testing and all of these different aspects of the sport, how will that be implemented?
So I'll take you on a little journey. We started off doing remote competitions where you competed in your garage or your gym and you sent in the video. And these were local level for us. We have local national competitions. These were very much local competitions used for qualifying for national competitions. But our first thought was around engagement of those people in weightlifting and keeping people lifting. So that was our biggest reason or biggest thought in doing that. Then we evolved to do live as it happens, competitions. So it means that you might be competing in New York, but you were judged from Maine or California or Oregon. And then everything was run from Colorado with our team. Actually, one of our team was based in Lausanne. Our events director was working for the IOC when the shutdown happened on secondment. So part of it was based from Lausanne. So all of those computers are linked together on a VPN, a virtual private network, which allowed us to be able to make the scoring system work. So we've got as far as that, where we can run a competition in over 500 locations. So now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to put on a normal competition, but we're going to allow people to compete from home. So we're hybriding those two. So we'll have people, the judges will be in Salt Lake City in the in-person competition. And let's say Marcus comes and he lifts, he's in person, it's regular, no problem. And then we go to the Zoom for Phil to lift. I might be in Colorado, and then I'll lift, I'll be judged, and then we go back to the person who's in the same way the competition would normally run.
I see. It's definitely a new idea. I like it.
It is probably the biggest challenge of broadcasting. It's swapping between in the camera in house and the Zoom and all of that is a big challenge. But we're confident we can pull it off in terms of the technology and the logistics. But we'll see. When you try something new, you're going to learn a thing or two. That's what I'll say.
That's for sure. Looking forward to see it. Something else that you have accomplished during your time with the US weightlifting is that you have achieved a gender parity. In the last 8 years, you have went from 11% female athletes to 50.
Yes, we have.
How was the process there?
It's inch by inch, or I guess I should say centimeter by centimeter. A lot of people have asked the same question, what did you do? And the answer is a lot of things. And we were very lucky to come around during the CrossFit era where it's very common now in your local gym for a woman to be able to pick up a barbell and do strength training is becoming much more common. So that has really helped. Let's be clear about that. But also we have really pushed our women. So that means that our women are front and center often on social media, at least equal or more to our men. We've really pushed that you can be a woman of any size, from a 4'8", 49 kilo athlete all the way to 6 foot plus 87 kilo athletes. There's a place for you in our sport. That we've done things like women's camp, exclusive women's coaching education. We've done a lot to promote. In fact, I'm wearing a Stronger Women, Stronger World t-shirt by pure coincidence for that question from one of the campaigns that we partnered with. And continuing to just focus on that, giving people places where they can feel safe to express what they need. Women's camp, I think, was a great example of that. It's not that women and men can't train together, but sometimes it's worth having those separate places where people do feel safe with that. We've also had some funding that we put behind that, things like our female referee fund to bring referees through, our female coaching fund to bring coaches through, and also athlete funding came into that too. One of the things we did in 2016 was the way that our athlete funding work was based on a percentage system, which was theoretically equal, but really did favor men. And we changed that to be on placement, which means women have had 2/3 of athlete funding has gone to women since 2016. And I think that's another part of it is you can earn good money in weightlifting, or at least livable money in weightlifting as a high-level female athlete. Now, of course, not everyone's a high-level athlete. Very, 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 very few of our athletes ever get to that level. But it's become accepted that women are over half of our athletes in our national events. Usually, we have managed our qualifying totals as well for both men and women to continue that parity at the national events. And that's always going to help you as well, because every time somebody goes to a national event, they go home with stories, they inspire more people to take up the sport. And that's all of those things coming together have a big impact. And you do need role models. You need Maddie Rogers. You need Morgan King. You need Sarah Robles. You need Jenny Arthur. You need Maddie Sasser to be able to inspire people to go, I can do that. Wait, she looks like me. We're about the same height. Maybe I can give that a go. Those are really important things.
Definitely. Role models are very important. In addition to the USA weightlifting, you have also been involved with the International Weightlifting Federation.
Yes.
You took on a temporary role there after a corruption case that was released from the McLaren's report. We don't need to go in detail there, but if you just want to give like a brief background on what you did at IWF.
Yeah, so we came in, and first of all, I was the secretary to the Oversight and Integrity Commission, which essentially oversaw the McLaren investigation, identifying Richard and then bringing Richard's team in to investigate the issues that the IWF highlighted by ARD, which is the German equivalent of the PBS here in the US or BBC in the UK. And the McLaren report was published June 4, and I think it's now pretty well known, the results of that report. Dr. Tamas Ayan, the now former president of the IWF, resigned in April, and the interim president, who's an American named Ursula Garza-Papandreou, asked me to come in and help her with some of the operations. I spent a few months there helping with the organization. It was a bit a challenge because ultimately, as a lot of people know, it was an organization that needs change. And I'm hoping change comes through the Reform and Governance Commission. But so far, there's been little evidence of that. And that's why, indeed, both myself and Ursula are no longer involved, is primarily due to that. Over that time, it was an interesting exploration of being in the international sphere and running an international federation. And obviously, there's been a lot that's occurred in the international sphere across that time.
I see. Unfortunately, corruption do exist in sports and in all sports, and hopefully we'll fight it in the future. But I think that it will always be a part of sport at some extent, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's doping, cheating, and and those things too, are all in that same sphere of it will always happen. All you can do is combat it. And figure out ways that you can close loopholes, learn from what happened, and move forward. I think that's exactly right.
So you mentioned doping there, and weightlifting is such a power sport. And what are you doing to work against doping in USA weightlifting?
I think that's a big question because doping is such a big issue in our sport. USA weightlifting, we've had a very strong stance on anti-doping for a long time. And I have to say, I think IWF has improved greatly in that area. First of all, the Clean Sport Commission, then the outsourcing to the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, and finally to the ITA, who then had time to learn weightlifting and get going. Obviously, COVID-19 has had a big impact on the doping control movement worldwide, and that's an entirely different challenge. But I do think overall the ITA is beginning to learn weightlifting and understand why does a weightlifter dope? When do they dope? And therefore the best times to test, etc. And the ITA and the IWF, I think, has therefore seen some vast improvement. Domestically, one of the things you asked about the doping control, actually I didn't answer earlier, about the virtual events. What we do is we submit to USADA, the US Anti-Doping Agency, location that they are going to actually compete in. And they randomly will send a doping control officer to that exact location. So that's what we did already in our virtual events. And indeed, we have seen some lower level positives from those. We test a lot at the national level and then also at the local level here in the US. So we test per member more than any other sport, I believe, in the world, but certainly here in the US. And that is our design, is that we want to catch people if they're doing anything bad at the local level, preferably, if not at the national level. So that when we're looking at our top athletes, we know and we're very confident that they are indeed clean athletes. Can I guarantee you that every athlete in USA weightlifting is clean? No, that's why we test. But can I give a strong assurance that I believe that our senior national athletes are clean? Yes. Do I believe that's the right way to be? Absolutely it is. But you can never guarantee. You must always continue that testing program. We also do education. Every single member of ours, coach, athlete, referee, must be anti-doping educated before they register for any event. So that's one cornerstone for us as well. We have a clean athlete pledge, which, okay, it's basically saying, yes, I swear I'm not doping, but it's still another step to say, yes, I will not do this. We have a minimum requirement in the US, which is over and above the IWF requirement of having 6 months of being in a testing pool before you're eligible to represent us internationally. We have a rule which is actually modeled off of the Clean Sport Commission's report and subsequent anti-doping policy changes, that if a club has more than 4 positives, that club will be expelled from USA Weightlifting and the head coach will be banned. We understand that there may be one athlete you cannot control, but when there begins to be a pattern, there's an issue. Those are a few of the steps that we've taken, and we continue to look for more. We have tried new things before. For example, the Lift Clean program, which is where we don't test every local event because there's 650 in the US, but we test randomized events every year, for example.
You cannot be everywhere, but I mean, it feels like you're taking great steps here.
We try. Can we do more? Always. And we look for more to do every time. But, I think one of the biggest things was educating every member. That was a huge step forward. Going from educating people just in person at events to everyone has to do it before they can be massive.
Before we move into the second segment, what can we look forward to the most in 2021 with regards to USA Weightlifting?
Well, I think the obvious answer is the Olympic Games. We talked about that a little bit earlier. It's we're working quads, I feel like, in the Olympics that really end with the Olympic Games. This quad's been 5 years, but also we're in the Paris squad now. So, we have those two competing priorities. And one of the things we've not really even begun to look at, I think, in most sports is, well, what's our 24 pipeline look like? Normally, that's what we'd be doing right now. And also, normally, a lot of NGBs would be sort of in a bit of a rest period right now, whereas 21 is not a rest period. It's ramping up. So I think the obvious is got to be the Olympic Games, really. I mean, that's what else is there that can trump the Olympic Games in Olympic sport?
True. The Olympics is truly something remarkable.
Well, yeah, but also think about it from a sports management point of view. From a purely management or business of sport perspective, what happens when and if, well, let me say when, our athletes do come home with the medals that we are suggesting? Funding increases, interest increases, profile increases, sponsorship likely as a result increases, membership likely as a result increases. So there's a lot of reasons why the Olympic Games, not just because our mission culminates at the Olympic Games, but also because there's so many business positive results that come from success in our Olympic Games. Outside of that, we're launching what I believe is the first national governing body level club management program. So we'll provide software to all of our clubs to be able to manage their business, and that will link directly into our membership system, so that our membership system and their membership system are aligned. So that's another exciting prospect for the next year. But I think a continued line of innovation, I think, is what we're going to look forward to over the coming year.
So in the second segment, I want to focus a little bit about you. What is your educational background, and have you been involved in sports in your youth, and a little bit your journey up until where you are now?
Yeah, I played rugby, I played ice hockey. My educational background is not in sport and business modeling and management, basically financial modeling is where I came from. I basically started my career in sport by working in professional ice hockey in the UK. Now I'm talking to a Swede. I can see the surprise on your face that exists. Actually, one of my colleagues, Paul Thompson, he coached there in Sweden after he coached in England for a while. Probably the only English coach ever to coach in Sweden.
Do you know what team he was coaching?
I knew you were going to say that. Was it Växjö?
Växjö, yeah. What was his name?
Paul Thompson. It was a while back. Now he's in the DEL with Schwener Wild Wings.
Okay.
And also probably the only English guy in the German league ever. But what's interesting is I learned so much from him that we now have in our high performance strategy here in the US for USA Weightlifting. I never at the time understood how much I learned from Tomo. He's Tomo. So I thank him for a heck of a lot of what we do today. But I got involved with in the founding, actually, of the British Universities Ice Hockey Association, and then subsequently something called Hockey Stars for Hope. Through that, I got my first jobs in pro hockey, first of all, Basingstoke Bison and the Coventry Blaze. Then I worked in the corporate world for a while, mostly in corporate student housing. Then for a chain of gyms named David Lloyd Leisure, which is a luxury gym chain, racket club chain. And then finally for the University of East London. And that led me into the Olympics, which led me to meeting with Team USA and working with Team USA during 12, and then subsequently to USA Weightlifting.
I see. That's a quite interesting journey, and I'm not at all surprised with the British ice hockey, to tell you the truth, because I have actually been involved with some ice hockey in Greece myself. So I know that hockey, I know that ice hockey exists in the least likely countries as well.
Yeah, it's funny. Ice hockey is the largest, I believe. It's still the largest indoor sport in the UK, which is rather surprising when you think about it. But it's actually a reasonably high quality league over there. The import level is pretty good. They often get players from the AHL, and the Swedes and the Finns who come over usually come from the second leagues, but they're usually very good players.
Yeah. So your career there is very interesting and.
Strange.
Strange. Not so strange. That's I think that's a lot of people that you stumble up on something and then that takes you to the next stage, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, I have a friend in Britain who's convinced I'm going to be running a circus at some point.
Let's see. In previous episodes, we have talked a lot about mentorship.
Yes.
Have you had a mentor in your career?
Not officially. I've never really had an official mentor, but there's certainly been people who've made an impact on my career. I talked about Tomo a moment ago, and the impact he had on me. Andy Buxton, the Coventry Blaze, similarly, both of those people really did have a big impact on me. I learned there how to really work in a smaller organization. We have 14 employees at USA Weightlifting, relatively small. How do you get a lot of things done on very few people? What do you need? What type of people do you need for that type of operation? I think there's a lot I learned from being at Unite Group as well. From how do you do change really well? And that's think about USA Weightlifting. What did we do over the last few years? Change management and cultural management is really what we've done to move forward. Where did I learn that? A lot of that came from Unite. So Neville Snell and Nathan Goddard and others there who taught me that. Neville particularly would be people I'd say. And then if you look at the Olympic movement, people like Doug Ingram, who I work with on 12 games, who retired and then started working again. His level of work ethic is absolutely unbelievable. Rick Adams at the USOPC, I think, would be another one. He actually was formerly the CEO of USA Weightlifting, so it's a very interesting relationship from that perspective. Some of the mentors I'd probably look towards. There's been others certainly along the way who've had some impacts, and people I've learned from. Tammy Tranter, who's the Chief Development Officer at USA Hockey. She taught me how to do fundraising, something I really didn't know how to do. Major gift fundraising. How do I go and ask somebody for $50,000 just to put towards the Olympic Games or toward these athletes and their needs at the Olympics? How does that happen? How do I do that? And Tammy really taught me that. So I'm an inquisitive character, so I like to ask questions and find out how things are done and find out what other people are doing. And I think that's helped me along the way. And none of these people probably know that they're a mentor, but they are in different ways. And then there's external people. One of the things I asked my team to do in 2017 was go and sit down with Sir David Brailsford of British Cycling. Well, what are we trying to do? We're trying to win medals in the Olympic Games as one of our big goals. And we're not doing terribly well right now. Sarah Robles did win a medal in 2016. We're very proud of that medal, don't get me wrong. But how do we go from there to 3 or 4? Well, who's done that before? Oh, British Cycling did it. Well, let's go and talk to them. Who's done those turnarounds? And the Chicago Cubs have done the same things. Let's go and talk to them. So it's really learn from what they did, because not everything will be applicable, but enough will that we can go, well, okay, well, that worked in baseball and that worked in cycling. How does that apply to weightlifting? So interesting items there.
Definitely. It leads me into my next question. You mentioned that you have a small team of 14 people, and it's the sports management podcast, and leadership is a big point also. So what would you say is your leadership style?
I'd say fairly interactive. I'm quite a hands-on leader, especially pre-COVID. I like to get my hands dirty and involved with projects. Even little things like when we're setting up an event, I can carry a pallet. I can go and set up weights. That doesn't need to be just my team. And really trying to get my teeth and knowledge into a project. One of the things Andy Buxton really taught me was always know enough about what the people below you do in order that you could do the job mildly competently yourself. And sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not quite as possible. But that particular phrase has always stuck with me of, in an organization as varied as this, I'm never going to know how much Dr. Anna Schweischer on my team knows about biomechanics. I'm not. I don't have a PhD in that. She does. It's not going to be there. I'm not going to be as good at financial management as my director of finance, Andrea, is. That's her expertise. But I should know enough to be able to understand what they're doing, interact with them. So I'd say it's interactive, and certainly I'm a leading from the within guy as opposed to a leading from the front, and certainly not a leading from behind. I encourage my team to really to be somewhat autonomous, but working together. And I don't know if I've said that right, but the biggest leadership thing I've ever learned is empathy. Understand where everybody else is coming from, whether it be that your membership, your athlete, your coaches, your board, and of course, most importantly, perhaps the people who work for you. Those are really important things. Just empathy, not just patience a little bit, but certainly empathy for where they're at. Understanding what it's like to be in their shoes is a huge part of leadership. And that's what's going to get you further than anything. Yes, you need work ethic. Yes, you need good ideas. Yes, you need to know how to put those ideas into action. But you need to understand people. You need to understand the place that they're at and meet them there and what they need and talk to them about it.
Yeah, communication is key.
It really is.
Something that I always ask the guests, and you have mentioned a couple of interesting names before, but if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, who would you suggest?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I wasn't prepared for that. All right, here's a few. Interesting one, Dr. Spencer Harris from UCCS. He has some really, it's been a sport management podcast. It'd be interesting. He's been a practitioner in England and then an educator. I think he'd be rather interesting to get both perspectives. Here's a guy I spoke to yesterday, Richard Caborn, who's the former Minister of Sport in England. I think his career going from bidding for the Olympics to being involved in sports consultancy, I think would be a very interesting discussion. David Brailsford is a fascinating guy to interview. I would look at people who've really made a difference in their organizations. Rocky Harris at USA Triathlon, phenomenal leader of an organization. Denise Parker, perhaps, she oversees NGB services for the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, so she has an understanding across all of those different national governing bodies, and used to run USA Archery and a medalist in the Olympic Games herself. Perhaps I should have put first. Paul Thompson, so you could talk about Swedish hockey. But I mean, again, genuinely fascinating guy. Those are some that come right to mind.
That's quite the lineup. I think you did great there.
Yeah, thank you.
I think all of them would be very interesting. Finally, is there something that I haven't asked you that you feel is important to mention?
I don't think so. I think, we're talking about sports management and leadership. I mean, my message is always empathy. That's the biggest thing you need. Yes, I'm proud of all the X's and O's that we've done, but I'm most proud of our culture, most proud of our people, most proud of our community. And that's what drives those results.
Thank you very much for being on the Sports Management Podcast.
Cheers, Marcus.
Take care. Thank you for listening to Sports Management Podcast. Do you have thoughts or ideas about this podcast, or do you know someone that I should interview next? Please reach out to me on sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or visit my website sportsmanagementpodcast.com. If you prefer social media, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at sportsmpodcast.